on elevating the system to advance and empower women leaders, a topic I am passionate about. I oversee CCL's business in the Asia Pacific region, and I am delighted to host this session today. From 2020, we have doubled down on gathering perspectives on women leadership here in Asia at CCL in two ways. Our women leadership research that I'll be speaking about today in the session, and our women leadership programs. And many of you know CCL has a long legacy in this space going back to the 80s. But the number of programs we've delivered in Asia over the last 5 years has increased significantly, and we've learned a lot along the way. Today, I am joined by a very, very special guest, Joanne Hoare, who is the Chief Learning Officer at DBS Bank here in Singapore. Now, we've seen over the last few years that there has been many setbacks globally in the journey to gender parity, unfortunately. And, the latest World Economic Forum gap data tells us that here in East Asia, it's going to take us 187 years to reach gender parity. Now, the good news is Singapore is a bright spot, actually ranking 4th in East Asia and the Pacific, and 49th globally. And DBS is another very bright spot in Singapore, and in fact, across the entire banking industry when it comes to really progressing and elevating female leaders. And so we're really fortunate to have you here today, Joanne, to tell us about that journey. But before that, let's start with hearing a little bit about your own personal journey. You have lived all over in the Middle East, in London, of course, holding a number of roles, a really exciting career journey. Let's hear a little bit about that, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Lisa. What a great pleasure to be here with you having this conversation. It's an honor to be invited. I think I'm really privileged on my own personal journey to have encountered a number of support systems and wonderful practices in the organizations I've worked with. I'm really excited to share that also with you today and with our audience. My personal leadership journey, I've spent 25 years now in the corporate space, primarily in financial institutions. I've worked for 3 amazing organizations, Citibank, HSBC, and DBS. I've spent the last 10 years now in Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore primarily. But I have, as you alluded to, I have worked in London. I've also worked in Dubai. Evidently, the women leadership journey is quite diverse. My experiences have been quite exciting. You've also alluded a little bit to that. Throughout my 25-year journey, I've held 11 different roles. And these 11 different roles also afforded me experience across country remits, regional remits, and group remits. So I have really been very fortunate throughout my career to gain the different perspectives across multiple cultures and different people that I've worked with. So really, really happy to be able to share a lot more about that. I do want to bring in a little bit of a personal sharing. As I reflected on my personal leadership journey, I don't think it would have been possible if it hadn't been for a particular senior leader who took time and said to me, "Hey, Joanne, what do you really want to do?" And I was caught off guard. We were just having a normal meeting. We were just closing on a few to-do items. And he leaned back and he asked me that. At the tip of my tongue, I said, I really wanted to get into the head office and in London. And surprise, surprise, I was able to articulate that. He listened to me quite seriously. And in 6 months, that vision of being able to go to London to contribute and work in a head office became real. So I just want to share that part of it. I owe my success, I owe my experiences largely to the fact that you have these sponsors and these wonderful people who come along and offer you opportunities. And so I say that's part of my own personal leadership journey to share.
Thank you so much, Joanne. What a powerful journey and a powerful story on sponsorship and what difference it can make. And I think the journey that DBS has been on is really commendable. And in many ways, it hasn't been progress over 1 year or 1 month in any sense. I think many, many years of work leading to some of the positive impact we see when it comes to elevating female leaders. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the steps, some of the programs, and even some of the data and metrics, because I think this is a piece that DBS has done differently in terms of how we leverage data and metrics to really uncover some of the hidden gaps that we talk about in the research. And we really bring those to light and are able to tackle some of the more subtle things that get in the way, not the glaring things. So can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I think I want to talk about this in two parts, right? In an organization like ours, I think it's key, first of all, that the education piece is really the foundation. Helping employees, helping leaders, helping managers understand diversity is first and foremost fundamental to the success of an organization. And I want to talk to a few, metrics. Maybe I could share to give a bit of sense to everyone here in the room. In DBS, the women make up 27% of our group management committee. That's at the highest level. And about 20% of our board members are women as well. Now, of course, we've set a target to head into the 30s by about 2030, so we've still some way to go. But on an overall basis, women are half our entire workforce. Now, at the senior levels, we consider that to be the senior vice presidents to the managing directors. We're about 41% at the last count. Yeah. And I think these metrics speak for itself, speak for our policies, our programs that help us recognize how do we build an inclusive workplace for women. So let me speak to a little to the program, and Lisa, you'll know this really well. Last year, we built our flagship program with CCL for women leaders. So the Women Leadership Program is so fundamental to building that awareness, to build that community for our senior women leaders. And most of all, it builds that pipeline into leadership. So having a program like this is really key to supporting women in an organization. So first of all, having that program and that education piece. We've got other education programs. We've got in unconscious bias. We build in respect at work. So all our employees and our managers are familiar with the concepts and what we do. It's part of our culture in DBS. So I think first and foremost, those are very important awareness building mechanisms that organizations should have. Now, aside those, I do want to speak about policies and processes that we build in. When you want to build that awareness, when you want to have an elevated sense of support for women, and we talk to your theme of today's conversation, elevate the system, you've got to have policies, you've got to have processes. So when we look at recruitment, we ensure that we have a diverse slate of candidates. When we look at compensation, we look at that pay gap. We look at pay equity, right? So we look at a number of things, promotions. We look at the statistics involving women who are being promoted into new roles and, into the senior ranks. Those were the things that I really want to emphasize. It's important to help women thrive in an organization, understanding the challenges they face. Let me take a pause for a second. I know, Elisa, we have questions possibly from the audience as we're talking, so I'll take your lead on that as well.
Thanks so much, Joanne. So I love how you're highlighting that it is a combination of very important pieces, almost like a puzzle that come together. Of course, programs and then policies and the right support systems. And, bringing all these together is not easy, and figuring out how to do it on the promotion side, for example, getting into the nuances in the data. So I think this is something that DBS has done extremely well. Now, I would like to invite that our audience can give us a little flavor of the challenges they face. Of course, women leaders do face a unique set of challenges. And if you do have a challenge that you face in the workplace, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And also, we are trying to leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to share that with us as well. I'm going to circle back to comments as we go in the discussion. Now, for the Elevating the System research that is coming out in June, we have actually collected 900 survey responses and interviews from 71 leaders across Singapore, India, Indonesia, Thailand, and Australia. And we're going to be comparing that to some of the data from 2020 in our Overcoming Barriers to Female Leadership report, where we actually looked at the gaps in perception between men and women. And we find that it's very important, because if between the two we have very big gaps in perception, that right there in and of itself is leading to some of the difficulty in taking action. We look at the barriers in two ways: the pull factors, which are the internal barriers that get in the way, where women kind of have the inner voice saying, you can't do it. A lot of the imposter syndrome that we hear about, the inner critic, what will people think? What will your mother-in-law think? All of these things. Then we have the push factors, which are the systemic barriers, some of the things you just talked about, Joanne, in terms of the promotion systems, and many other factors in society as well. So without removing the systemic barriers, I think one thing we realize is we cannot fully tackle the internal barriers that hold women back. The two of these are very interconnected. And so that's why elevating the system really requires tackling both, and especially those push factors. So how do you see these push factors and pull factors getting in the way for female leaders? And what can the organization be doing?
Yeah, no, as you're sharing around the push and pull factors, a personal story comes to mind. So let me continue on. My sponsor, who said, look, Joe, clearly you really harbor ambition. Let's make that happen. And I received an opportunity to go overseas. You'd be surprised, and we're fairly progressive now. But my mom said to me, are you sure you want to uproot and leave? What about starting a family? She said to me. What about your obligations to us as a daughter? So, man, that was tough. That's societal pressures. Those are the expectations sometimes women, maybe still more. It was some time ago that I experienced this, that I think we need to be still very conscious about as we get women to go for the big jobs, go for the internal mobility. So I reflected on it, and I did feel at that time that societal pressures or expectations do play a part in my decision making. It's a factor in that. So it's real, and I think we shouldn't ignore it. And because of that, I think all the more so organizations should be very embracing of these challenges. I'll give you an example, and I would like to mention to you that DBS has got a really high retention rate of women returning from parental leave at 92%. So we've been monitoring this rate, and how do we actually do that? First of all, I think for women who take parental leave to make that decision to start a family, there are concerns. When do you need me back in the workplace? What about the scorecard, KPIs? These worries at the workplace obviously are important to the women. But if the organization can be very clear in the policies supporting women who are going for parental leave, and we support the men going parental leave as well, so that they can be of help to their women. And I think that that's an element of a form of support an organization can do, so that each party feels really supported, as they go through a milestone in their lives. So the organization can think about that, eliminating some of the push factors, or mitigating some of that. I don't think we can fully eliminate them, but finding ways to sort of bring those push factors down, it would be incredibly helpful. So that's what we're trying to do, constantly reviewing and enabling the women to take decisions, knowing that the organization is aware around their multiple responsibilities and the multiple hats they hold.
Thank you, Joanne. And it's no doubt it's not easy to navigate all this. And I think your personal story is very powerful. And as we look at comments coming through, some societal and family, with all best intention, I think in your story, your mother's comment was surely with all the very, very best of intentions for you, and how overcoming these type of pull factors that can get in the way is something that is kind of continuously evolving, and we need to navigate. And it also brings me to looking at how feminine superpowers can actually get in the way and lead female leaders into a bind. And this is something that we'll be talking about as we launch the research. I think you have heard the term double bind, most have. So in the double bind, men and women are actually rated differently for the very same behaviors. For example, feminine superpowers we know can be caring, being empathetic, following the rules, actually getting things done. And when female leaders exhibit those behaviors, they can be seen as soft, as conforming, as lacking strength and strategic thinking. And so the double bind is when women conform to gender, they're considered not good leaders, right? When their feminine strengths are really at play, that can happen. And when they're conforming to leadership roles, they can be seen as not good women. So with the double bind, what we're seeing, what we're discovering in the conversations we're having here in Asia, is that there's also a double flex where women can tend into overcompensating, taking on too much of the responsibility, both at the workplace and at home, trying to solve everything for everyone, being a good woman and a good leader. And often this double flex leads into dropping out, derailment, burnout, what we hear, where we lose many women along the way, getting into higher ranks. And so when you consider your experiences and what you've seen, how do you see this getting in the way for female leaders, the double bind and the double flex, and what can we do about it?
Everything you say, I recognize, also journeying through my own career as a woman. And I think organizations have that responsibility to create an environment where there's equal opportunity, where you don't feel that you're discriminated against. And that's where I feel really strongly about what DBS has done. And all this while we've had a flexible work arrangement, and obviously past the pandemic and all, we've continued to improve on creating an environment that allows the women to thrive. Let me give you an example. Our current flexible work arrangements allow for a woman who's just had a baby to spend up to a year working from home. That's an arrangement that can be done, can be spoken with their manager, and that eases someone back into the work environment. So I think that's really key in understanding some of the concerns, the worries a new parent might have, a new mother might have. So that's one. We have other options. We have sabbaticals for women who need to take that time out to be a caregiver. It doesn't apply necessarily just to women, of course, but these policies and these enabling mechanisms, I would like to think, allow for us to then exercise that choice, allow for us to take into consideration what's become a very complex organization, a world that we live in as well. So if you take all of that into account, I would say an organization that can support its women in their careers, it's down to a strong lens around flexible work and arrangements, policies that help enable everyone to be at their best, and inclusivity. So if we can look at that as a starting point, then maybe that double bind, double flex, issues. Look, we probably can eradicate all of that, but certainly, again, it's about mitigating it, removing some of the factors, or eliminating some of the high stress points as far as we can.
Thanks, Joanne. As we're really, diving deeper into the current reality in Asia, do you see any of this being different, or anything we need to pay attention to in terms of how this is for female leaders in Asia?
Yeah, we pondered around this, didn't we, some time back? We talked about there could be differences in the Asian society versus the Western domains. And I did think, speaking as an Asian woman, that there are certainly a lot more, societal pressures and the image of the Asian women. That being said, I do find, however, in Asia that women get a lot more support and help. There's the family network, there are help that we can get. So, interestingly, and as I was reflecting around this, so on the one hand, we have so much of society pressures, but yet also help is where you can get more of. I remember when I was living in the UK and I had my new baby in the UK. So yes, I had a wonderful experience of having my second child while I was working out in the UK. What struck me was I had to do everything on my own. I wasn't able to get help necessarily as I would have gotten a confinement nanny, say here in Asia. So I did it all by myself. My husband was helping me at that time, and that's why we do need a longer period of support in the UK. So if you can see some of the differences that are occurring, whether you're living in Asia or living in the UK or in a Western country, you begin to appreciate that actually you need different ways of managing and supporting the women there as well. So I'm reflecting this. I don't know if it necessarily answers the question, but I think there are nuances, there are differences. But the underlying point is that the women do need that support wherever they are.
Thank you. Thanks. And I agree. And, one of the things we've seen across the many programs we conduct is that the pull factors tend to get in the way more, in fact, for female leaders. All across the world, in Asia, the pull factors will be about 66%, 2/3 of what's getting in the way. And I think that's something to pay attention to. Now, I want to switch gears to talk a little bit about enlisting male allies. And there's one quote from our research. This is not someone from DBS, from another organization who we interviewed. And they said, whether we like it or not, the majority of the most senior leaders are still men in the organization, most organizations. And we're going to need them to flex without feeling insecure in their own jobs. The journey of women advancing brings a lot of insecurity for men. The organization needs to look at and help men manage these insecurities and make them feel more comfortable. Otherwise, they can't really be an ally. I found this really insightful in terms of the stage we're at. 15 years ago, I remember International Women's Day events where we had people coming from all over the world together. And in some of these large corporate events, there would be maybe, one or two men. And we're really past that stage. And I think DBS has done an amazing job in enlisting male allies. So can you tell us a little bit about where you are?
Thanks for mentioning that. We're really proud of the work that we've done, and we call this Lean in Circles. We've built a social community, both men and women, supporting one another on career advancement, challenges at work, performance. So we've been able to get male allies, and it's quite equal number. Really proud to say, men stepping up to have discussions, to have these social conversations in a formal social way. Now, I think men today, they're also very proud of their daughters, they're very proud of their wives. That's also an internal motivation for them to participate and to volunteer to be part of these conversations. It's all about elevating that awareness, all about elevating the motivations within the organization to help one another succeed. Really proud of that. When we first started the Lean In Circles, we had a number of volunteers step out. The number of people who signed up for it was a whopping 600 participants across the group in DBS. That only tells us that how important this is to build that community, to build that allyship amongst men and women together at the same time. We continue on this particular initiative. It's still ongoing. It's something that I think is part of the membrane of the organization as well. And people want to come forward, people want to participate. So we're really proud of that particular initiative.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a couple of questions that I see coming through from the audience here. And one is around difficult and strategic assignments. And I think this is a great question because we do see actually just how important this is for any leader to get ahead, taking those stretch assignments. They can be, in some cases, overseas assignments or just purely moving into a very different function, taking on a different challenge. You talked about changing role 11 times in your career, and you talked about being in multiple countries. What we see is that women are offered these assignments and not always take them up as often. In Asia, that's what we see in our research. But the question here that's come through is, are we finding enough ways to make difficult and strategic assignments accessible to female leaders? And what can we do about that?
Well, I think this is real because whether for the woman or for the men, I think there are real considerations. If you have children, you're thinking about their education. If you've got aged parents, you're thinking about leaving behind family when you're elsewhere. So these are things that are real over time in any case. I think where we need to consider is, are there opportunities to give women to be able to experience that stretch in their leadership with or without also that external international assignments. So we've flexed some of the long-term international assignments to short-term assignments that make it more easy. I mean, to make it possible for the woman to say, hey, let me do a 3-month short-term assignment in this space, and then we move on from there. So we've experimented with that. So we've done a lot more short term, between 3 to 6 months, instead of say a 2 to 3 year assignment overseas. So we've done that. But more importantly also is, should anyone go on an external assignment, you've got to be absolutely clear what are the gains, what are the developmental points around the career, what are we hoping to achieve. So if we can answer all these questions, clearly, give the relevant support to the individual, to the woman, and allow them to make choices with the balancing act that they have to do, I think then you achieve a higher success rate. It's not about just go and do it, but here, we understand your family situation. How can we make it easier for you to take up this assignment? How can we stretch your leadership competencies in this assignment that we want you to experience? So we have to think about always. And we also have to be very, very cognizant around people who can't take up an international assignment. And I think if you go back to what can we do to support individuals who have had to say, I'm sorry, I can't, then maybe revisit that journey at a later stage or a different life stage, perhaps. So we need to think through all sorts of ways through our talent and talent management policies, through our internal mobility policies as well. So I think that's a sort of a quick answer to some of the questions that have come through.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe we have time to actually take one more question. And this one is about managers. And we know that managers are really the linchpin in the organization in terms of retention, motivation, empowerment. And so, what steps can managers take to ensure that the leaders they're working with aren't affected by burnout and forced to exit? And you talked a bit about sponsors, critically important. But if we look a little bit at the managers, how can they be more aware of maybe stereotypes and some of those hidden, gaps, some of the hidden biases, in fact, that are getting in the way often? What are your thoughts?
You've touched on a topic close to my heart. In our learning and development department, we focus so much on the managerial training. And you're right, they're such a force, they influence such a large portion of our population, and they're critical to firstly, carrying the culture, to having great practices as a manager and leader. So we make sure they're fully aware around things like unconscious biasness, right? We spend time coaching with them, going through training and also practical sessions around what to uncover, to recognize where is the biasness coming in. Are you actually in a space supporting someone, woman or male, right, in their careers? So we want to make sure our leaders are equipped to recognize that first and foremost, and what the best practices are. So we spend a lot of time training managers around that. So I think fundamentally, learning, training is key to influencing the wider organization on practices surrounding elevating women, enabling us to recognize how do we support one another better in the organization? So I think that's very, very key. Was there a second question to that? So the managers was the linchpin. Was there something else as well that you had asked?
Yeah, no, the question was all about the managers. I guess maybe if you give us any kind of final thought you have about the future, really, of this agenda. We've been working on gender parity for many, many years, and we find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads, I think, globally, where we see progress in some areas, and at the same time, things are stalled in other pockets. And so as we move forward in this agenda, not just within DBS, as we move forward in this agenda in our societies, in our communities, and in our organizations, Joanne, what is your final thought about the future?
Definitely continue to work. You've got to carry on the work, and we are making progress. We have to recognize we are making progress and celebrate the progress. Organizations have the responsibility to develop the programs, the mechanisms in the best way possible to give that equal opportunity to women. As individuals, as leaders, I encourage all of us to do the best we can to give that opportunity, to sponsor somebody, to be an ally for someone. These are the things that you can do as an individual to support the whole agenda of elevating the system. So I hope those would be the best advice I could offer from my own personal journey as well.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I think really powerful stories and excellent examples, very specific examples that we can take away here today. To close the session, I just want to end with a quote that you've heard me share before. And this is a quote going back many, many, many years. Nothing can be more absurd than the practice that prevails in our country of men and women not following the same pursuits with all their strengths and with one mind. For thus, the state, instead of being whole, is reduced to half. And this is Plato 2,500 years ago. And so I just want to remind everyone that this is a long journey. And of course, this journey is work in progress. It continues. And every bit of effort we put in, every one of these programs, every one of these practices, just the intention and the stories that we share in community really keeps us moving forward in a journey toward equity, toward equality, and toward a better world overall, I think. So we thank you so much, Joanne, for taking the time to share all of your personal journey and experiences. And we thank everyone who joined us today for this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.